Within the world of Studio Ghibli films, a blurry line seems to exist between humans and animals. Animals are frequently depicted through extreme anthropomorphism, not only looking like people, but actively behaving like them too. If the act of cats dressed in coattails or raccoons engaging in guerrilla warfare wasn't crazy enough though, then the transformation between these two states most certainly can be. I'll never forget the visceral shock I felt when I first saw Chihiro's parents turn into pigs in Spirited Away. While at a less frightening degree, Ponyo evokes similar absurdity as its titular character becomes human in a transformation that, to a degree, feels comic. In these cases, the shocking absurdity of there being no line between the human and the animal is the point. These characters are all fantastical, the narrative always paints them as being out of this world. For this reason, I find it incredibly interesting that Ghibli's most absurd anthropomorphized animal is perhaps its least fantastical. Porco Rosso follows its titular character, an ex-pilot for the Italian Air Force who now spends his days as a lone bounty hunter traipsing the gorgeous vistas of the Adriatic Sea. While it's certainly made clear that once upon a time, Porco was indeed a human being named Marco, the fact that he now sports a snout and springy tail is never painted as absurd. Not only does Porco himself display extreme ambivalence towards his physical condition, but everyone else does too. The citizens of the world respect him and his skill, and resultingly champion him or see him as a threat. The film's acceptance of its protagonist being a pig has always struck me as weird because, by design, it's a choice that really should stick out. The narrative is foreground to the looming threat of World War II, Italian's fascist political regime, and yet amongst all these events that are so grounded in historical reality is a walking talking pig. Never for a moment does Porco Rosso allow audiences to question this because of the extreme ambivalence it places upon the situation. While the film is conscious of its absurdist nature, it's always doing everything in its power to dilute such a notion. One such way it does this is by separating Porco and his adventures from the historical reality. Porco lives on a small secluded beach that's surrounded by towering rocky cliffs, the only way in or out to fly between mountains into the vast expanse of the ocean. If he does choose to venture beyond his home though, the gorgeous Adriatic Sea is a pristine ocean that still allows him such separation. Here, he can glide through the skies, take up bounty hunting jobs as he pleases, only having to interact with society when he feels like it. His main place of social connection is the Hotel Adriano, which, while brimming with people, is still a place that's never bound by the restrictions of realism. Thus, Porco's isolated cove, the surrounding islands, the larger Adriatic Sea are all places where the absurd isn't only allowed to exist, but where such existence will never be questioned. Within the boundaries of this world, the story can establish its own rules for what is absurd and what's not. This safety that the Adriatic Sea affords the absurd is contrasted in Milan, not only due to Porco's past political associations, but because the reality of normal Italian society risks exposing the absurdity of his nature as a pig. When Porco does arrive in the city, it's a dangerous place. For most of his visit, he's forced to hide in Mr. Piccolo's shop while his plane is repaired. When he does head out to wander the streets of the city, it's only very briefly as Fio picks him up in a truck, which leads to them momentarily being chased by the police. On one hand, this scene injects tension into the narrative. Porco's a wanted man, pig, so seeing him skirt around law enforcement like this establishes a sense of danger. On the other hand, this moment threatens to expose the absurdity of his condition. Of course, fascist political regimes don't only exist within the fictional world of Porco Rosso, but are a very real point of connection with our own reality. Pressing its presence up against Porco with the police in this scene threatens to unravel the normality of his absurd nature, as the restraints of our world are pressed so incredibly close to his. It's important to address the fact that, yes, Porco is a pig, but a lot of his physical condition still resembles that of a human, which makes it a lot easier for us as audiences to accept his state as normal. Porco walks on two hind legs, talks in the same language as the people he interacts with, and has mannerisms that are undoubtedly human-like. We see him doing very human things, like ordering a drink, paying off debts. He even eats dinner with a napkin tied around his neck, a mark of cleanliness that humorously juxtaposes the way a real pig would eat out of a trough. Porco is an anthropomorphized pig, more human than he ever is animal. If only to further distinguish him from an actual pig, his costume design additionally normalizes his piggish condition. He's usually depicted wearing flight uniform, a scarf, and an aviation cap, clothing that obscures the majority of his body. He's got a mustache and is always wearing a pair of sunglasses. Really, when dressed in this state, the only thing that gives away that he's a pig is his ever-present snout. While this self-presentation by Porco sees him evoke human attributes, characters' responses to his absurd state further solidifies it as being normal. In the real world, if you saw a pig walking about on two hind legs in an aviation suit, you'd question your insanity. Within the fictional world of Porco Rosso, though, no one sees Porco being a pig as out of place. Thus, since the interior world that the film creates never questions his condition, we as audiences are never made to either. In fact, the film goes a step further and makes Porco appear desirable despite his piggish condition. We see a group of adoring fans fawning over him as he flies past them in his plane. The newspapers highlight the epicness of his bounty hunting adventures instead of questioning how on earth a pig can fly a plane. The name Porco may still stand as a humorous jab at the idea that he could be fried up and eaten as a plate of bacon and eggs for breakfast, but as Gina still calls him by his name Marco, any disbelief in his normality is dispelled. While Porco's character is designed in such a way that neither the world nor the audience are made to question his condition, the actions of some of the supporting characters are humorous and bonkers enough to the point where the spotlight of absurdity shines upon them. Right from the get-go, the film demonstrates this with the actions of the seaplane pirates containing a sort of comedic kindness despite their antagonistic function. They kidnap the schoolgirls but act more as chaperones than captors. They let them wander their plane like it's an excursion and are against them swimming in the ocean because they say that it's dangerous. The way that these interactions provide a sweet sense of comedy is almost ridiculous, since they're the bad guys in this scenario that Porco's chasing. Throughout the rest of the film, we can laugh at the stupidity of these pirates, but their absurdity pales in comparison to that of Porco's direct competitor, Curtis. I never fail to laugh at the moment when Curtis just appears in Porco's hideaway and shimmies his way down the cliff faces to join the hubbub. It's small instances like this that make some of the supporting cast appear more absurd than Porco. In the case of Curtis particularly, his actions throughout the film present him as perhaps a bigger pig in attitude than Porco. He stoops to the criminal underbelly of the world as he makes deals with pirates. He bursts into Gina's house uninvited, boasting of his fame and celebrity status. And even though he's trying to woo her, he falls for Theo and asks her to marry him the instant that they meet. He lacks honor in every sense of the word. This notion of a pig being tied to attitude rather than physicality is further reflected in Porco. The movie never attempts to provide a logical explanation as to why he's a pig. If the narrative was perhaps a la Emperor's New Groove and revolved around him trying to break some supernatural curse to revert back into a human, then his piggish state would have been seen as absurd, as the movie would have been consciously acknowledging that it's out of this world. Instead, his condition is represented as a manifestation of his own psyche. After watching his friends perish in the war, he's racked with personal guilt, suggesting that the reason he lived when they didn't was a message from God to fly solo. Thus, we can consider his being a pig as a physical manifestation of his own selfish detachment from the world. He's a pig because he saw the horrors of war and decided to live a life as a bounty hunter on the Adriatic Sea. He completely severs himself from the war and political climate of Italy, refusing to make economic contributions to society, claiming that his weaponry is for the sole pursuit of bounty hunting. As perhaps the most quotable line from the film goes, he'd rather be a pig than a fascist. He only flies for himself. If only to solidify the notion of Porco being a pig on the basis of his selfish solo pursuits, The brief moment in which Curtis sees Porco's human face at the end of the film is after he volunteers to lead away the Italian Air Force, a relatively unselfish act considering his desire to remain politically ambivalent. All of this, though, is a lot of my own personal interpretation of the film. There's no concrete reasoning. In such vagueness, though, it's easier for audiences to accept Porco as a pig as being normal because there's no established boundaries for normality in this world. Honestly, Porco Rosso should be one of the more absurd Ghibli films. The line between an animal and a human is so faint that it's basically invisible, and with such an idea being constantly on display in the form of our protagonist, it's kinda hard to ignore. Despite this though, the movie never once allows for its state of disbelief to break. Yeah, the concept is wacky, but the supporting cast is perhaps wackier. The narrative never concerns itself with Porco's piggish condition. I mean, it doesn't even resolve with him reverting back into a human. Best of all though, all of this takes place in a wonderfully fantastical world. As Porco's plane glides over the shimmering waters of the Adriatic Sea, he exists in a world that plays entirely by its own rules, one that never lets its viewers consider its outlandishly titular character as absurd.